The stallion came thundering down the narrow trail like a storm had burst loose from the hills. Mud flew in clumps behind him, hooves hammering the frozen ground, eyes wide and rolling white in his head. His saddle was twisted reins flailing like black snakes, and behind him came the noise of shouting men, useless voices swallowed by wind and fear. Mara Red Elk didn't think. She moved. She dropped her satchel in the snow. Her boots found the ruts of the trail like they remembered them from childhood. The smell of panic, hot leather blood, and frost filled her nose. Her black skirts tangled at her calves, but she didn't slow. The stallion had a quarter-mile left before the trail veered toward the river bend, and if he hit that curve at his current speed, he'd go over. "Easy," she said, breathless but steady. "Easy, brother. I see you." The men behind her shouted again, one voice warning, "Ma'am, get back," but they didn't know horses. Not the way she did. The stallion reared at the narrowing path, hooves striking air, and Mara stopped dead 5 feet from his fury. She opened her hands. Her heart thudded against her ribs so hard she thought her widow's brooch might crack in two. "You're not alone," she murmured. "Not anymore." The stallion's breath puffed in sharp bursts. Foam streaked his neck. His eyes locked on her face. Just her standing there in her worn black coat, the wind catching the long braid that had fallen loose from its knot. He lowered his head by a bare inch. She stepped forward once. Once was enough. The crowd behind her went silent as Mara laid a bare hand on the stallion's soaked neck. He flinched, but he didn't bolt. Her fingers found the reins slick with ice and mud. Her other hand found the curve of his cheek. There she whispered, "You're safe now. I promise." When the danger had passed, when the stallion stood still, as if listening to her heartbeat, that was when she realized the men were all watching. One of them rode forward from the pack. He sat a glossy black mare with practiced grace shoulders, squared face half-shadowed beneath a broad-brimmed hat. His coat was trail-worn, but finely made dark green with silver thread stitching along the cuffs. "That's my horse," he said, voice low and measured like someone used to being obeyed without raising it. Or was until he forgot his manners. Mara nodded once, still rubbing the stallion's trembling flank. He was scared. Something hit him. "You should check his sides." The man dismounted with silent precision and walked forward. He stood nearly a foot taller than her, lean and broad-shouldered, with dark blonde hair curled damp at the collar and eyes that flickered between gray and green like leaves under storm clouds. He didn't smile, but he didn't need to. He touched the stallion, then crouched to examine the flank Mara had pointed out. "Whip marks," he said tightly. "Fresh. Angry ones." "Then someone didn't belong near your stock," Mara said. He looked up at her, then straight into her face, and something in his expression shifted. "You stopped him from killing himself. Or someone else. Thank you." She blinked, unused to gratitude from a man like him. He just needed someone to speak soft. The stranger gave the reins a tug and led the stallion away from the river trail, motioning to the others to clear a path. Then he turned back. "You're Mara Red Elk." The way he said her name wasn't a question. She lifted her chin. "Yes." He nodded once. "Cole Travers." Everyone knew the Travers name. Owner of Meadow Valley Ranch. Inherited after his older brother's death. Rich, unmarried, rumored hard. She hadn't expected him to be so young, or so quiet. Mara took a step back. "If your horse is safe now, I'll be on my way." "You walk into town, she said simply. "I'm headed that way. If you're comfortable, I'll ride beside you. It's the least I can offer." Every voice in her head, and a few from the crowd still lingering, warned her against it. A widow walking beside a rancher like Cole Travers, people would talk. But then again, people already did. She'd buried her husband 2 winters ago, watched her in-laws split her dowry like spoils, and fought for the deed to her small homestead, with nothing but stubbornness and ledgers. Let them whisper. "I'll walk," she said. "You can ride if you like." He didn't argue, just fell into step beside her, leading the stallion, who now walked with quiet obedience. The road dipped into shadow as they moved between the cottonwoods. Their boots crunched frost. His mare trailed behind them, calm now. She felt him glance at her every few paces, but he said nothing. It was unsettling. Finally he asked, "You do this often, stop runaway horses, no. Talk to things no one listens to, more than I'd like." A huff of amusement escaped him. "You always this direct, I don't have the time or luxury to be otherwise." They passed the fork where the road turned toward the reservation boundary. Her cabin lay another mile past it, tucked beneath the shadow of Owl Ridge. She thought he'd break off there, but he didn't. "I've got tenants near your bend," he said casually, gesturing to the curve of land above her cabin. "Flooded fields lately. Can't figure why." "It's not the sky's fault," she said. "Something's changing the land. You see things others miss, I see what people want to ignore." They walked a few more paces in silence. "I could use someone like you," he said then, "on the ranch." She stopped walking. Cole did too. "You don't even know me," she said. "I just watched you calm a 2,000-pound animal with your bare hands and no fear. I've seen men less useful who talk themselves into jobs every day." "That may be true," she said slowly. "But I don't work for men who speak in riddles." He looked at her, really looked. Not like a man appraising a widow's worth, but like someone seeing a solution to a problem he'd lived with too long. "I'd like to make you a proposal," he said, "but not here, and not without respect." Mara hesitated. A crow screamed overhead, cutting the silence like a blade. Somewhere in the trees, she thought she heard wind moving through dry branches like the sound of prayer beads clicking. "Then speak it when it's proper," she said. "Not on the road with people watching." He nodded, the hint of something unreadable in his eyes. "I'll come by tomorrow, 3 o'clock." She nodded once, then turned down her path. Her cabin's chimney was already visible over the ridge, smoke trailing. As she walked away, she heard him call out, "Mara." She turned. He stood by his horse, one hand resting on the stallion's flank. "Thank you," he said again, softer this time. "You didn't just save a horse." She didn't answer, just walked faster. Inside her cabin, she dropped her shawl on the peg and stood by the window, heart pounding harder now than when the horse had charged. She didn't know what Cole Travers intended, but something had shifted on that road. And tomorrow she'd find out what. "If you step into this, Mara, you'll be seen beside me, and that means more than numbers and ledgers." Cole Travers stood on her porch at precisely 3 o'clock, just as he'd said. The knock was deliberate. Not loud, not hesitant. Mara had been expecting it, though, that hadn't stopped her hands from trembling when she laid aside the biscuit dough she'd been working and wiped her palms clean on her apron. Through the front window, she caught sight of him standing just beyond the doorframe. He wore a charcoal wool coat lined with trail dust and horsehair, one hand resting loosely on the brim of his hat. The other held nothing. Not flowers, not papers, not the kind of offering a man made when calling on a woman. He had come empty-handed, but not empty-hearted. There was intent in his posture. Mara opened the door, letting the early fall wind slip past her ankles. "Mr. Travers, Mrs. Red Elk." He nodded. "May I come in?" She stepped aside. The fire's hot, but the house is small. Don't expect grandeur. I expect the truth, he said simply, stepping inside. The room was modest, a square of polished pine floors, stone hearth, and a small table near the window, where sunlight filtered across ledgers and a mug of steeping mint tea. The walls held woven blankets, feathers, and one photograph Mara and her late husband, both young and smiling too early in the marriage to know what would be taken from them. Cole removed his hat and held it respectfully against his chest. You said you had a proposal, Mara said, gesturing for him to sit. He settled into the straight-backed chair across from hers, boots planted neatly on the mat. I've been running Meadow Valley near 4 years now, he began. Took it after my brother died. Before that, I was studying law in St. Louis. Didn't expect to come back, much less take over a ranch that sprawls through 2 valleys and half a dozen tenant families. Mara listened, arms crossed over her chest. You're managing fine. The stallion wasn't proof otherwise. Cole's lips quirked, but it wasn't quite a smile. That horse is a mirror. Proud, half wild, doesn't trust easy. That's not what worries me. She waited. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Mara, there's a divide in Meadow Valley, between the main house and the tenant fields, between how things look and how they really run. I've got good men, but none of them know how to stitch a torn ledger or listen to a tenant's pride without stepping on it. You want me to patch books and egos, I want you to do what you did yesterday, he said. See what others miss. Speak truth without lace. I need someone who understands livestock land and numbers, and who knows what it is to live on the edge of being dismissed. She narrowed her gaze. You want to hire a woman for estate work. That alone will have the county gossips keeling over. He nodded. I've learned to stop caring what kills them. Mara leaned back, hands resting on the tabletop now. Why me? Because yesterday you walked straight into a storm and calmed it. Because you didn't blink when I offered you my name. And because I trust what you see. She didn't answer right away. The fire popped behind her. Outside, the wind tossed a few dry leaves against the windowsill. This wasn't a flirtation. There was no softness in his voice, no calculation in his tone. Just need, respect, and maybe something else, something quieter. You understand what this looks like? She asked, voice low. A widow working beside an unmarried rancher. That's more than social inconvenience. It's assumption, judgment. Cole set his hat down gently. If you step into this, Mara, you'll be seen beside me, and that means more than numbers and ledgers. He held her gaze. But if you do it, he continued, you'll have pay fairer than any store clerk in 2 bulls. Your own mount. Control of your hours. No subordination. You report to me alone, and even then, only in honesty. She studied him, wondering how long it had taken for him to learn how to speak plain and not smooth. Men with land rarely knew how to ask for help without dressing it up as favor. I have one condition, she said finally. No shadow words. No politeness when truth is needed. You treat me like a hired man, or not at all. If I do good work, say so. If I misstep, tell me. Don't shield me from consequence to prove you're better. Cole's eyes warmed a fraction. Agreed. And I stay in my home, she added. This is mine. My walls, my stove, my decisions. I don't sleep under another man's roof, even for convenience, of course. She nodded. Then I'll take the job. Something in the air loosened. The weight of all the unspoken risks seemed to lift just slightly. He rose. I'll send my head groom, John Weatherby, to collect you tomorrow morning at 8. I'd like to show you the home farm and some tenant lands. You'll meet the steward and the staff. Tomorrow then, she said. He reached for his hat. Thank you, Mara. You've already given more to this valley than most folk realize. She didn't reply, just walked him to the door. He paused at the threshold, looked out toward the ridge. The sun was dipping low, casting long gold across the slope. The silence between them was steady, not uncomfortable, just present. "Do you ever miss him?" he asked quietly. Mara didn't pretend not to know who he meant. "Yes," she said, "but not the way people think." Cole nodded once. "See you in the morning." When he rode away, she stood at the door until the dust of his trail settled. Inside, the fire crackled low, and the shadows on the walls leaned eastward. She sat back at the table and pulled her ledgers toward her heart, steady now. Tomorrow she'd walk into a new world. Across the valley, a stallion paced in a quiet paddock, already waiting. Out here, respect isn't asked. It's proven by how you treat what others overlook. By the time John Weatherby pulled up in front of Mara's place, the fog was still lifting off the meadows. His horse snorted against the crisp air, and the wagon behind him creaked as it settled. He was a lean man with a scar that traced from one ear to his jaw, his expression unreadable and quiet like winter pine. He tipped his hat to her as she stepped out in her wool coat and riding gloves braid tucked neatly beneath her scarf. "Mrs. Red Elk," he said. "Mr. Travers sent me to fetch you. Wagon's yours for the day. You'll be driving it from here." Mara blinked. "Me," he nodded once. "Cole said if you were worth hiring, you'd know how to handle 4 wheels, 2 reins, and 1 bad-tempered gelding." "That true?" She narrowed her eyes at the dark chestnut in the traces. The animal pawed the earth like it carried its own opinion. "I've handled worse," she said, climbing up. John climbed in beside her, and they set off east across the long slope toward the homestead proper. The wagon wheels crunched frost-hardened dirt, and the sun began slicing gold through the spruce treetops. For several miles, neither of them spoke. But Mara noted how he watched her not with suspicion, but curiosity. Testing her judgment by what she noticed, how she turned the team before a muddy patch, how she kept her weight even over ruts. They crested a ridge, and below them lay Meadow Valley, wide undulating fields, stitched together by fences and ditches, tenant homes nestled among cottonwoods. The main house rose on a small bluff, a wraparound porch curving around its ribs like a shield. It wasn't ostentatious, but it was proud, symmetrical, and solid. Everything about it spoke of responsibility. John pointed. "We'll ride the south end first. Tenant plots, irrigation, ditches the mill line. He said you'd want the books later, but the land comes first." Mara nodded. "Land always tells its truth. Paper only hides it better." His lips twitched like maybe, just maybe, she'd passed a test. They turned off the main road and made their way down a narrow dirt path lined with broken fence posts and overgrown berry bramble. They stopped first at the Corbins, an elderly couple managing 5 acres with a milk cow and a failing son who limped from his war injury. Mara stepped down and listened as Mrs. Corbin described how their well kept clogging and their roof leaked in the north corner. Mara examined the shingles herself, careful with her words. "You're due a repair. I'll note it myself," she said, "and not buried beneath numbers." When they returned to the wagon, John leaned on the rail. "You didn't ask what their yields were last season," he said. "No need," she replied. "I saw the calluses on her hands and the lopsided corn rows behind the coop. They're scraping by, but they're working." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. They made several more stops, an old ranch hand whose cattle had dwindled since his eldest boy moved to Butte, a widow with 3 small children and a field of frost-burned beans, and a family trying to dam up a leaking canal with old feed sacks. Mara spoke with each plainly, never rushing, never pitying. She asked to see their barns, their feed levels, their horses' hooves. Not once did she bring out a ledger. At midday, they ate on a hillside. John offered her a slab of smoked meat and cornbread. "You think all this can be fixed?" he asked, chewing slowly. "Not all at once," she said, watching the sun slide across the valley. "But one thing at a time, and only if you start by listening. These families, people think they're ungrateful because they speak blunt. That's not it. They're just tired of making themselves small to be heard." He considered that. "Cole said you wouldn't flinch at truth." "I don't flinch," she said, brushing crumbs from her lap. "But I won't be used to make Meadow Valley look prettier than it is. No one's asked that. Not yet." They rode in silence again, this time toward the main house. Cole was already on the porch, arms crossed, watching as the wagon pulled in. Mara hopped down first, her boots landing square and solid. John gave Cole a nod. She didn't bruise the gelding. She knew where to cut the slope, and she made 5 observations I didn't catch. "That?" so Cole asked, glancing at her. "She listens," John added. "That's rarer than most folks think." "I've always known it," Cole said, his eyes fixed on her now. "Mara, walk with me." They stepped around back toward the open paddocks where the chestnut stallion she'd calmed the other day now stood, penned muscles twitching under his coat. The beast snorted once, but didn't charge. He remembered her. Still pacing the world like it owes him something, Cole said. Mara stopped near the fence. "Maybe it does." He turned to her. "What did you learn today?" "That Meadow Valley's bleeding quiet. Not enough to cause panic, but enough to rot the roots if it keeps. Your tenants aren't lazy. They're worn thin. They need repairs, but more than that, they need to know they're seen. And you'll help me fix it, I'll help you face it," she corrected. "Fixing comes later, after you admit it's broken." A gust of wind carried the scent of pine and manure. Cole stepped closer, close enough that she could see the dust lining his coat, the wear on his collar. "You know they'll test you," he said. "Some folks won't like a woman in this role. Some men won't listen." "You sure?" Mara's voice didn't waver. "Out here, respect isn't asked. It's proven by how you treat what others overlook." He looked at her for a long time before he said softly, "I chose right." She didn't smile, just turned her eyes back to the stallion. The wind picked up, and the horse lifted his head, watching them like he understood. Behind them, John Weatherby had already unharnessed the wagon and was waiting by the barn. The day had more to unfold, but for now Mara stood still at the heart of the valley she would learn tend, and if necessary, defend. The land would not go unloved again. Under a sky-spitting sleet, Rosalind ducked beneath the wind-slicked eaves of the barn arms, wrapped tight around her middle. She hadn't cried in months, not since Elijah's passing, not since the creditors showed up the very next week. But now something raw threatened to break loose inside her. It wasn't the loneliness or the long nights without firewood. It wasn't even the cold that clawed at her bones. It was what she'd just overheard. "He's giving her a week," Eula had whispered through the kitchen wall, not knowing Rosalind was out back stacking the last of the damp wood. "If she don't come up with the deed or pay him, Mr. Garraway's taking the ranch. Whole place, livestock and all. 7 days. And not a penny in her name." Her boots made a hollow thud as she stepped inside the barn. Dust and hay filled her nose, grounding her with their earthy sting. Luna, her mare, lifted her head and gave a gentle whinny. The old girl still limped from the canyon fall, but she was alive just like Rosalind. They were both wounded and still standing. Rosalind leaned her forehead against the stall door. "What am I supposed to do now, girl?" The mare's muzzle nudged her arm. She didn't know how long she stood like that, but when she finally turned, she nearly collided with the man at the doorway. Wells. Again. He didn't knock, didn't call. just stood there, broad shoulders dark with melted snow hat clutched in one hand. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes weren't. His eyes were fire and storm all at once. "I heard Garraway was sniffing around again," he said, voice low, deep. "You all right, no?" She answered sharper than she intended. "But what's that matter?" He stepped forward. "It matters to me." She wanted to snap back to remind him that she didn't need saving, but something in his voice, no, in his stillness, softened her. He didn't come with answers or demands. He simply stood there like a stone wall offering shelter from the wind. "I got 7 days," she said finally. 7 days before they take the only thing I have left." He didn't flinch. "Then we'll use all 7. She blinked. "We, you and me," he said, walking further into the barn. "I ain't much good at pretty talk, but I can negotiate a cow sale, fix fences, talk sense into lenders when needed. You tell me what needs doing, I'll see it done." Rosalind's throat tightened. Why, Wells looked down, jaw clenching, before he met her gaze again. "Because you saved that horse like she was your kin. Because I've seen men turn away from a wounded thing, but you didn't. Because maybe I don't want to see this place vanish any more than you do." She stared at him, chest aching. "You got no reason to trust me," he continued. "But I won't let Garraway win without a fight." The silence stretched heavy with things unsaid. Then Rosalind nodded once, slow. "All right." They worked through the dusk, her sorting what livestock she could spare to sell him, measuring lumber, estimating repairs, writing down buyers who might still honor Elijah's name. By the time Eula returned with news of a neighbor needing help, Calving Wells was already hitching the cart. "I'll ride out tonight," he said, glancing at Rosalind. "It'll fetch a small wage. You stay, keep going through what you've got left." "You don't have to, no," he interrupted gently. "But I want to." And just like that, he was gone into the dark. Inside the quiet house, Rosalind sat before the fire, mind spinning. She remembered Elijah's voice, calm and firm as he'd once told her, "Never let pride cost you your future, Rosie." She hadn't understood it then, but now. A knock at the door startled her. It was Marla Standing Elk, wrapped in a red wool shawl, cheeks flushed from the cold. "I heard about the ranch," Marla said without preamble. "And I brought you something." She held out a worn ledger and a parcel of wrapped paper. "It's from my brother in Ada. He's got a buyer needing hardy workhorses and broke mules. Pays fair and up front. The ledger's got all his dealings." I thought, maybe it helps. Rosalind accepted it slowly. "Marla, I can't." "Yes, you can," the woman said, fierce. "You're not the only widow fighting. You don't have to stand alone." Something broke open then, not in pain, but in quiet gratitude. Rosalind stood there, stunned at the sudden swell of support that was beginning to wrap around her like a blanket. Marla squeezed her arm. "You're not invisible, Rosie. Don't ever believe that." As the woman left, Rosalind stared at the ledger and packet in her hands. A chance. Not much, but enough. The wind shifted outside and she stepped to the window. Somewhere out there, Wells was likely crossing the ridge by lantern light, chasing down wages for land that wasn't his. And still, he rode. She hadn't asked for his help, but he offered it anyway. Like Elijah would have. No, like a man who wasn't trying to replace Elijah at all. Just stand beside what he'd left behind. She stayed up late that night sorting livestock listings, making calls, even circling potential buyers in the ledger. She was no stranger to long nights anymore. But for the first time, she didn't feel alone in them. By morning, the frost etched sharp stars across the windows. Eula poured coffee in the kitchen, humming an old hymn. "I reckon it's starting to turn," the old woman said, not looking up. "Storm's done its worst. Now's the digging out." Rosalind sipped the bitter warmth, eyes red but dry. She tied her hair back, pulled on boots, and buttoned her coat. "Where you headed?" Eula asked. "To town," Rosalind answered. "There's a man named Harland Frey who's still owed a favor by Elijah. I aim to collect it." She stepped onto the porch, just as the sun pierced through the gray, and with every step down the path, she repeated the words. Wells had spoken words that for the first time in a long while didn't feel like a lie. "You're not alone." And she wasn't. Not anymore. The sun hadn't cleared the ridge when Rosalind crossed the wooden threshold of Harland Frey's storefront. Her boots were caked in frozen mud, and her hands clutching the old ledger had gone numb long before she reached town. Inside it smelled of leather brass and pipe smoke, the kind of scent that stuck to a man's coat and made him feel rooted to the land, whether he deserved it or not. Harland was behind the counter, as he always was, arms folded across a gut padded by years of good stew and no hardship. He didn't look up right away, just kept polishing a brass stirrup like he had all the time in the world. "I need 5 minutes of yours," Rosalind said, voice, even though her spine braced for dismissal. He looked up, then blinking once. "Rosalind Maddox." "I still use my husband's name," she said coolly, stepping closer, "though it seems this town's forgotten he had one." Harland huffed and set the stirrup down. "That's not fair." "No," she replied, setting the ledger on the counter between them. "What's not fair is Garraway coming to claim my land on a technicality, while men Elijah helped pretend not to remember. You owe my husband. I've come to collect." Harland's fingers twitched, eyes narrowing. "Elijah spotted you seed money to open this shop," Rosalind continued, flipping open the ledger. "He even vouched for you with the bank when no one else would. And now I'm asking you to honor what's due." Harland shifted in his stance. "What exactly is it you want Rosalind buy 3 of my mules outright?" she said. "You'll get good beasts, strong and trained, worth every cent. That money buys me time." He stared at her for a long moment, then sighed. "I'll take 2. Full price." She didn't blink. 3. Or I walk straight to Mr. McClary, who'd love to hear how you got your shop in the first place." Harland's eyes flared, but he reached beneath the counter and pulled out a ledger of his own. "Fine. Bring them by before the week's out." Rosalind didn't smile. She just picked up her ledger and turned. "You'll have them by Friday." The cold outside felt different on her skin now, less biting, more bracing. She walked past the bakery, the mill, and the mercantile, each step echoing louder than the last. She stopped only once more at the small cabin where Dovie Nix lived with her aging mother. Dovie opened the door, fast cheeks pink and apron dusted with flour. "Rosie, I heard about the ranch." "I need help with paperwork," Rosalind said without hesitation. "You're the only one I trust to make it clean and tight." Dovie blinked, then nodded. "You bring it by tomorrow. I'll make sure it's done right." Back home, the sky had turned pale silver with the approach of another storm. Rosalind found Eula on the porch shelling beans with her usual steady rhythm. "How'd he take it?" the old woman asked. "He blinked twice and reached for his checkbook," Rosalind replied, sitting beside her, "which is more than I hoped for." Eula chuckled dryly. "Sounds like the town's starting to remember who you are." "I don't need them to remember me," Rosalind said. "Just what they owe." By nightfall, Wells returned. Snow crusted his coat, and he smelled like wet saddle leather and cow dung. He slid off his horse with a grunt and handed her a small envelope. "Calved twins," he said, rubbing his shoulder. "Lost sleep, gained $50. Not much, but it'll buy oats and keep the lights on." Roslyn opened the envelope slowly, then looked up. "You didn't have to do this." "I wanted to," he replied. "Same as I did yesterday. Same as I will tomorrow." She didn't know what to say to that, so she nodded. Together they led his horse into the barn, the silence between them not empty, but full of effort, and something steady growing beneath it. Over the next 2 days, Roslyn became a storm in her own right, organizing, selling, repairing. She mended fences until her hands cracked, and when Dovey dropped off the paperwork, she sat at the kitchen table and signed everything with a clear hand and an unshaking grip. On the 5th day, Harlan sent his boy to fetch the mules. "They're tied and ready," Roslyn told him. "Feed them well." She stood at the gate as they were led away, heart aching. Those mules had hauled her through grief, through debt, through her first winter without Elijah. But she didn't cry. Not this time. The 6th day dawned sharp and blue. The land was still, like it was waiting, like even the wind had paused to see if she'd fall. She didn't. Instead, she met Wells at the edge of the south field. He'd brought a post driver and fresh cedar rails. "You're serious about fixing this fence today?" he asked, brow raised. "If we're going to keep the cattle in for the buyer?" "Yes," she replied. He smiled then, not with his mouth, but with his eyes. They worked side by side until their arms shook. He dug, she hammered. When she missed and caught her thumb, she didn't cuss, just hissed and shook it off. He didn't offer to take over. He handed her the next post instead. "You're tougher than you look," he muttered. "I've had to be," she said. The sun dropped behind the hills, gold spilling over the pasture like a promise. They stood side by side, admiring the stretch of new fencing. "You've almost done it," Wells said quietly. She didn't look at him. "Not yet." "No," he said, "but close." That night, Eula brought stew to the table and they ate together. Wells, Roslyn, and the old woman, who'd once threatened to leave if the porch wasn't swept proper. After dinner, Roslyn stepped onto the porch alone, mug warming her palms, breath clouding the air. The weight of the week pressed in on her bones, but she didn't buckle. The stars blinked above the ridge. The same stars Elijah used to count before bed, naming them like friends. "I miss you," she whispered to the dark. "But I'm not drowning anymore. I'm standing." Behind her, the door creaked. Wells leaned in the frame, arms crossed. "I saw Garraway's buggy pass by this afternoon," he said. "Didn't stop. He will tomorrow." Wells nodded. "You ready? I have to be." He didn't say more. Just stood with her, watching the land stretch silent and strong beneath a sky full of quiet judgment. Roslyn took a breath and spoke without turning. "You asked why I let you stay. Why I trust you." He waited. "Because you don't try to take Elijah's place," she said. "You just make room beside what he built." Wells's voice came low and sure. "I'd rather build something new with you than take what's not mine." The stars shivered. She didn't reach for his hand. Not yet. But she didn't move away either. "If I never let anyone see the pieces of me that hurt, how would they ever know where to hold me?" The morning after Eliah's silent retreat into the dark, Dana stood at the edge of the pasture, staring at the fog that clung low to the fields, like a wounded thing refusing to rise. Her arms were crossed over her chest, blanket pulled tight, but it wasn't the cold that made her shiver. It was the unspoken. Eliah hadn't come back into the house. At some point in the night, she'd heard the faint sound of the barn doors opening then closing. She knew he'd gone to sleep in the hayloft, avoiding her, not out of cruelty, out of pain. She understood it more than she wanted to admit. She walked across the field, now dew soaking through the hem of her nightgown. Moss nickered softly when she passed the gate, but Dina's eyes were fixed on the barn where faint smoke curled from the chimney. He had made a fire, so he was up. That was something. The wood creaked beneath her boots as she climbed the ladder to the loft. Elijah was sitting against the far wall blanket draped over his lap, one arm resting across his knees, the other holding a steaming mug. He didn't look up when she entered, just stared at the flame flickering below. Dina sat near him, but not too near. Close enough to share silence, far enough to leave room. "I'm not going to push you," she said quietly, hands tucked under her thighs. "But I'll sit here if you want company." He didn't speak, but she caught the tightness in his jaw, the way his throat moved like he was trying to swallow words he didn't know how to say. The fire popped. Wind brushed the roof. And after a long stretch of aching quiet, he finally rasped. She used to hum when she did dishes. Same little tune over and over. Drove me nuts. Dina glanced at him. Elijah let out a brittle laugh. Now I'd give anything to hear it one more time. His voice cracked at the end. Not loudly, not in a dramatic way, just like something in him slipped, and he didn't try to catch it. She didn't want to leave, he continued, voice low. She fought. God, she fought so hard. And I fought with her about the treatments, about staying home or going to a hospital, about when to tell the girls. I was so damned angry at everything. At her, at me, at God. Dina reached out slowly, not to touch, just to be seen. Her hand hovered between them. I watched her fade every day. And the worst part was, I kept smiling in front of the girls. I made it look easy, strong. But inside I was breaking, and when she finally passed, the girls crawled into my lap and they said, "It's okay, Daddy, she's an angel now." And I nodded. I lied, because it wasn't okay. His shoulders shook once, then again. And then his hand found hers, held it tight like an anchor against the grief he'd refused to name. Dina said nothing, just sat there letting the hurt be heard, the silence be shared. "I feel like if I let myself really fall apart," he whispered, "I won't know how to put the pieces back." Dina's thumb brushed his. "If I never let anyone see the pieces of me that hurt, how would they ever know where to hold me?" He blinked at her, and for the first time she saw its softness under all that steel. The boy he must have been. The man who loved with every fiber of himself and didn't know how to grieve without feeling weak. "I'm not trying to fix you, Elijah," she said gently. "I just want to know you. All of you. Even the hard parts. Maybe especially those." The sun broke through the fog outside. Its light slanted through the loft slats, warming the hay. Down below, hoofbeats echoed in the distance. Dina's ears perked. She leaned toward the opening and squinted toward the road. Dust. Riders. "Someone's coming," she said, rising quickly. Elijah stood too, wiping his face with his sleeve, soldiering his expression back into something unreadable. They descended together. The rider was already dismounting, an older woman in a finely stitched duster, eyes sharp beneath a feathered hat. Behind her, a second horse bore a familiar figure, a teen girl with tight braids and eyes filled with fire. "Miss Dana Storm," the older woman said, voice cool and controlled. "And you must be Mr. Elijah Blackhorse." Elijah nodded slowly. "I'm Clara Monroe," she said. "This here's my niece Jewel. We've come about the dispute with Amos Keller." Dina blinked. "How do you know about that?" "Because I'm the one he wants to buy your land for. I own half the valley to the west. Amos promised to deliver this piece too, but I like to see things for myself before I make a mistake." Jewel crossed her arms. "She's lying. Amos don't care about the land. He just wants to break your spirit." Clara gave her niece a sharp glance, but didn't deny it. Dina squared her shoulders. This land is my husband's grave. I won't sell it to someone who sees it as a coin purse. Clara studied her, then Elia, then the barn. Her gaze lingered on the girl's drawings, still tacked to the wood wall. I don't care about your sentiment, Clara said coldly. But I do care about potential allies, people who can outmaneuver Amos without playing by his rules. She reached into her coat, pulled out a slip of paper, and held it out. This is the name of the county assessor who's about to approve a rezoning plan Amos pushed through. If you want to stop it, you'll need leverage. I suggest you find it fast. She mounted her horse. Jewel hesitated. I'll stay, she said suddenly. Just for a while. Someone's got to tell the truth around here. Clara rolled her eyes but didn't object. She spurred her horse and rode off. Dina stared at Jewel, unsure whether to be suspicious or grateful. The girl shrugged. I know his game. I used to think he was smart. Now I think he's scared. Of what Elia asked, Jewel's mouth curved into a knowing smile. Of people who stopped being scared of him. Inside the barn, the fire still burned in the hearth, quiet and steady. And outside, for the first time in weeks, the wind shifted. As if something old was lifting its hold, and something stronger untamed, and healing was beginning to take its place. I didn't ask for your pity. I asked for your trust. The slap of saddle leather echoed through the quiet morning air as Lark twisted the girth strap tighter beneath Roan's belly. The stallion shifted uneasy under her hands, as if sensing the storm still brooding inside her chest. Her fingers trembled not from cold, but from something she couldn't shake. Last night's conversation with Elias had left her exposed, peeled raw. She'd stood there in the middle of his barn, arms wrapped around herself, half expecting him to turn away when she confessed she used to steal. That she'd bartered her last wedding ring just to survive one more week. But instead he'd looked at her like she was still someone worth seeing. And then he said it. Maybe you're more honest than the rest of us. And that broke her in ways she didn't have words for. But that didn't mean she trusted it. The sun peeked over the ridgeline, golden rays stretching across the frost-silvered fields. The old pine gate to the pasture creaked as a familiar figure leaned against it. Hazel. You're up early, Lark said, wiping her hands on her wool skirt, swallowing the knot in her throat. Could say the same for you. Hazel's gaze drifted to the saddle, then back to Lark's face. Where you riding off to? Not far. Just need to clear my head. Hazel gave a long nod, lips pursed. You mean after Elias asked you to stay longer? Lark flinched. He told you he didn't have to. He hasn't stopped watching that porch since you walked back inside. Lark sighed and leaned against Roan's warm shoulder. I don't know what I'm doing here, Hazel. I didn't come to be someone's project or charity case. You're not. Hazel's voice softened. You're someone who fought like hell to survive. That don't make you a burden. Makes you worth fighting for. Lark looked away, blinking fast. I'm not sure I know how to stay anywhere that doesn't expect me to disappear. Then maybe it's time you learn. She wanted to believe that. But years of living at the mercy of men like Daryl and the silence that came after her husband's body was lowered into the earth taught her that love could be a trick and safety could vanish like morning mist. She mounted roan boots, slipping slightly in the stirrups. I just need a little time. Hazel didn't stop her. She just nodded, watching Lark disappear down the trail behind the barn into the pines where sunlight filtered through like a veil. Elias had been splitting logs for over an hour, the rhythmic crack of the axe biting through the morning hush. Sweat beaded on his brow, even though the air was still sharp. But none of it quieted the noise in his head. He kept seeing her eyes when she spoke last night, how they shimmered with defiance and shame in equal measure. She'd survived things he hadn't dared ask about. and still she carried herself like the fight wasn't over. He'd seen that look before, in the mirror, after the war, after the fire that took half his orchard, after his brother Jonah's funeral, that stubborn resolve to keep going when the ground had given way. But with Lark, he didn't just want to help her survive. He wanted her to stay. He heard footsteps behind him crunching in the dry grass. Turning, he found Hazel there, coat drawn tight around her shoulders. "She left," Hazel said. Elias wiped the back of his neck with his sleeve. "How long ago? Hour, maybe more." Took the north trail into the pines. He dropped the axe and grabbed his coat. She shouldn't be out there alone. Not with that ridge still slick from last week's storm. She ain't a child, Elias, I know. He paused. But I don't want her to think leaving is her only choice. Hazel tilted her head. Then go remind her she's got another one. Lark urged Roan up the incline, the rocky trail narrow and twisting beneath her. Snow patches lingered in the shadows, crusted and sharp. The air smelled of pine resin and wood smoke from some far-off cabin. Up here, the world felt quieter, simpler. No questions. No eyes watching her every move, waiting for her to slip. She dismounted when the trail narrowed to shale. Roan pawed nervously. The wind shifted, and that's when she heard it. A branch snapped behind her. She spun. Elias. He stood just beyond a fallen cedar, hand resting on a boulder, eyes searching hers. "You follow me." "Not exactly. Just didn't want you thinking you had to vanish to be safe." "I didn't ask for your pity," she said, voice sharp, breath curling in front of her like smoke. "I asked for your trust." Elias stepped forward, careful not to spook the horse. "And you have it. But I need you to know something. When you walked into that barn with your head held high after what you'd been through, I didn't see someone broken. I saw someone braver than I've ever been." Lark looked down, fists clenching. "You don't know me. Maybe not all of you." He took another step. "But I know enough." Silence held between them, thick as snow clouds. "I've built my whole life on not needing anyone," Lark said quietly. "And still here I am, wanting to believe you." "Then believe me," Elias said, voice steady. "I didn't offer you this ranch because I thought you were helpless. I offered it because I see the kind of strength it takes to get back on a horse after life throws you." Roan nickered softly behind her. Lark looked up, eyes shining. "What if I fall again?" "Then we get you back up." She exhaled shakily. The wind ruffled the hem of her coat. For the first time, the silence between them didn't feel like a chasm. It felt like an invitation. "All right," she whispered, "but I'm not staying out of gratitude or guilt." "Good." Elias cracked a smile. "I've had enough of people staying for the wrong reasons." They turned back toward the ranch together, steps slow but aligned. The trail back down seemed less steep now, the sky overhead turning a brighter blue. But Lark's heart thudded with something unexpected. Hope. And a deeper question that hadn't found its words yet. What would it cost her to love again, and could she afford it? The wind carried no answers. Only the promise of more to come. "I never needed rescuing, until you." Rain lashed the cabin windows, like a fury released from heaven, rattling the panes with every gust. Lark stood barefoot in the center of the kitchen, the pale morning dress she hadn't yet changed from damp at the hem from where she'd stepped onto the porch earlier to check on Wildfire. The fire snapped and popped in the hearth, doing little to warm the storm in her chest. James hadn't returned. She clutched the edge of the table, her fingers gone white. The clock ticked louder with every passing second, the sound a hammer to her ribcage. What had she done? What had she said to push him away? He'd looked at her last night as though she were the sun breaking through a storm and she'd looked away. Because it was easier to look at shadows than risk finding out the light might leave her too. A knock, Lark's head snapped up. Another knock, firmer this time. Her heart slammed into her ribs. She yanked open the door, letting in a wind that shoved her hair wild around her face. And there he was, drenched, hat in hand, looking like a man who'd warred with something all night and lost. "You came back," she whispered. His eyes flicked over her hunger and hesitation, warring in his expression. "I shouldn't have left the way I did. You didn't owe me anything." She stepped aside, silently beckoning him in. "Come in before the storm carries you off." He hesitated for a beat before stepping inside the door, clicking softly shut behind him. The room felt smaller, warmer, thicker with everything unsaid. James set his hat on the table and rubbed a hand through his wet hair. "I rode through half the valley trying to clear my head. Every mile I thought I could reason with myself. Tell myself I misread things, that I imagined the way you looked at me." Lark wrapped her arms around herself, goosebumps rising. "You didn't imagine it." His gaze jerked to hers. She swallowed hard. "I've spent a long time surviving, James. That doesn't leave a lot of room for believing someone might care for more than just the burden you carry." "I don't see you as a burden, Lark." His voice cracked like the timber of an old barn. "I see you as, God help me, I see you as everything I didn't dare want again." The storm outside howled. Inside it quieted. Lark moved to the fire, turning her back to him because she needed a second to breathe. "I've never had someone stay when things got hard. Not my father, not Joe, not anyone." James took a slow step forward, then another. "You think I'd leave you now? You might, if you knew everything. Try me." She turned, heart pounding. "I've been alone so long I forgot what it felt like to lean on someone. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be loved." He stopped inches from her. "Then let me show you." Her breath hitched. James reached out his fingers, brushing a wet lock of hair from her cheek. "You don't have to carry it all anymore. Not the farm, not the fear, not the pain." Tears blurred her vision. "But I'm so tired of being strong." "I know." His arms folded around her. "That's why I came back. I don't want you to have to be strong for both of us." She pressed her face into his chest, the scent of rain and horses and something so unmistakably him wrapping around her like sanctuary. For the first time in years, the dam inside her cracked. "I buried my husband with guilt," she whispered, "because I was angry when he left. Because I didn't love him the way I was supposed to. And when he died, I thought I'd wasted my only chance." James's hands gripped her tighter, fierce and steady. "You didn't waste anything. You're alive, Lark. And you get to want joy. That doesn't make you faithless. That makes you human." Her sob hitched against his chest, but she didn't pull away. "I don't know how to let this be real. Then let me keep showing up until you believe it." He pulled back just enough to look her in the eye. "If you're willing, I'll stand beside you. Not just today, not just while the storm rages, but through the hard seasons too." Lark nodded, a single slow motion that felt like the turning of a lock. Their foreheads met, soft and trembling. The moment wasn't loud. It didn't shout. It simply existed, real and sure. She drew back and looked at him through new eyes, ones no longer shielded by armor. "You said you were done rescuing people." He smiled, rough and full of ache. "I never needed rescuing until you." A gentle knock interrupted them. James moved to the door, hand instinctively resting on the holster at his hip. When he opened it, Nettie stood there, her face pinched with worry, eyes darting past him to find Lark. I hate to barge in on weather like this, but I couldn't sleep. She stepped inside with a quick breath. Something's not right. We had a man from out near Caldwell ride into town last night. Said there's been another fire. A big one. Barn and livestock lost. 2 families are looking for help. James stiffened. Another fire? Nettie nodded. 3rd one in a month, and always on land not far from here. Lark felt the old chill crawl up her spine again. That's not coincidence. No, ma'am, Nettie agreed. And the man said he saw someone riding off before the flames took hold. James's jaw tightened. We need to ride out. If this is connected to what happened to your place, we've got to stop whoever's behind it. But the storm, Lark murmured. He turned to her, all steady resolve. We've weathered worse, and you won't be alone. She looked from him to Nettie and back again. The fire inside the hearth cracked. But there was another fire building now, one not of fear, but of determination. I'm coming with you, she said. James opened his mouth to argue, but she lifted a hand. I've run enough. If this is tied to me, I want to see it with my own eyes. He held her gaze, then nodded. Then we ride together. Thunder boomed above them, but the 3 of them stood steady. The world outside might have been drowning in wind and rain, but inside that room something unshakable had taken root. A choice, a bond, a beginning that didn't ask for perfection, only courage. And as Lark reached for her coat, she realized her hands no longer trembled. Not with James beside her. Not with the truth between them, because love, true love, doesn't wait for the storms to end. It shows up in the middle of them, soaked to the bone, saying, I'm still here. Some fires ain't started with matches, they're lit with envy and cowardice. The mud sucked at the horses' hooves as they rode out the storm, thinning to a hard drizzle that clung to everything like cold sweat. Lark kept her gaze fixed ahead, her jaw tight beneath the brim of her borrowed hat. James rode to her left, posture tense, while Nettie followed just behind her, slicker soaked, but her grip on the reins steady. They reached the ridgeline where smoke still clung low in the valley like a bruise. The scorched remains of a barn lay twisted and blackened, smoldering in the rain. Livestock pens were half collapsed, and 2 cows lay still under a canvas tarp. The house had been spared barely, but its windows were soot-streaked and shattered. A young boy stood barefoot in the muck, hugging a half-grown collie to his chest, like a lifeline. Behind him, a woman with streaked cheeks and dirt-smudged arms tried to comfort a toddler who wouldn't stop crying. James dismounted first and handed his reins to Nettie. Stay with the horses. He approached the woman quietly, Lark following close behind. The woman straightened when she saw them, hope and caution mingling in her eyes. We're not from the law, Lark said gently. We're neighbors. We heard what happened. The woman gave a weak nod. It was past midnight when we smelled smoke. My husband, he's out trying to salvage what's left of the back fence. Did you see anyone? James asked. The woman hesitated, then reached into her apron and pulled out something wrapped in a cloth. Part of a broken glass bottle, the rim stained black with tar, and something acrid. He threw it through the barn window, she whispered. I saw his silhouette. Long coat. Riding a narrow-chested bay with one white sock. Fast horse. James took the shard, turning it slowly in his hand. This wasn't some drunk's mistake. This was planned. The woman's face crumpled as her toddler wailed louder. Lark knelt to speak softly to the boy holding the collie. What's your name, sweetheart? Eli, he mumbled into the dog's fur. You did real good keeping her safe, Lark said. We're gonna help now. All right. He nodded once, fierce and small. James stepped away to speak with the woman's husband, who had appeared from behind the house, mud streaking his trousers and grief etched into his sun-worn face. Nettie came forward with a spare blanket from her saddle roll and offered it to Eli without a word. He accepted it like a gift from God. Lark watched the scene unfold and felt it like a strike to the chest, this family torn open, just like hers. James returned after a moment, his face a mask of storm clouds. They've had trouble before. 2 weeks ago, someone cut the wire to their cattle gate. Just shrugged it off as pranksters. Now this. Nettie crossed her arms. It's deliberate. Someone's picking through the edges of the valley, testing what they can get away with. Lark took a step closer. This is what happened to me, too. The chicken coop fire. The tracks in the dirt. Whoever this is, they're moving like ghosts. James's eyes met hers. Not for long. They left the family with what supplies they had, flour bandages and extra tarp, and rode back toward the trail that ran along the ridge. James wanted to cut across the East Bend and check the Peterson property, but Lark tugged on her reins and called wait. They all halted. There's a man who always used to stop by my farm after deliveries, she said. Scruffy beard, older, never bought anything, just lingered. Gave Joe a strange feeling. Maybe it's nothing, but I wonder if he's still around. James narrowed his eyes. You remember what he rode gray gelding, scar on its left flank. Let's pay him a visit. The man, Harlan Deeks, lived in a shack nestled between a rocky outcrop and the dense pine line past Cinder Hollow. The place stank of kerosene and rotting pelts. When they arrived, no smoke rose from the chimney, but 2 horses stood tied to a split rail, one of them a gray gelding scarred exactly as Lark remembered. James dismounted and motioned them to hang back. He moved quiet, as mist boots avoiding the creaky boards of the front stoop. Then he knocked, hand close to his holster. No answer. He knocked again, harder. Still nothing. James tested the door. It creaked open. Stay here, he ordered, and disappeared inside. Lark's gut twisted as they waited. Nettie scanned the tree line. Something's not right. A loud thump inside made them both jump. Lark ran for the door despite Nettie's shout. She burst into the gloom and found James standing over a toppled chair. The place was a mess. Papers strewn, burnt logs still warm in the hearth. Someone left in a hurry, he muttered. Lark's eyes landed on a half-charred sheet in the fireplace. She used the poker to drag it out, coughing on the soot. The words were smudged, but enough remained. Lark Tanner. Property. Final warning. Make it look like an accident. Next, James leaned over her shoulder, reading fast. This was about you. She stood, the blood draining from her face. James pocketed the fragment. He's scared now. We rattled him. But why me, she whispered. Why burn down my farm? Nettie stepped into the doorway, rifle over her shoulder. Some fires ain't started with matches, they're lit with envy and cowardice. You were alone, Lark. No man to defend the place. Easy target for someone looking to take what ain't theirs. Lark's throat tightened. He wanted the land. Or wanted you gone from it, Nettie added. James turned to her, jaw tight. We ride back. Show this to Sheriff Walton. He'll recognize the name. If not, we ride further. Lark reached for his hand, grounding herself. You don't have to do this for me. He looked at her like she'd spoken another language. I'm not doing this for you, Lark. I'm doing this with you. They rode in silence for a while after that, the storm finally passing, leaving a sky split open with threads of light. The rain had scrubbed the world clean, but some stains clung deeper than water could reach. Lark gripped the reins tighter. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was fighting back. You don't scare a woman who's already walked through fire barefoot. The town's sheriff office leaned sideways in the morning light, a warped porch post slumping with age. But Lark walked up those steps with her shoulders squared and her chin set like granite. Mud still clung to the hem of her skirt, soot lined her sleeves, and there was a smear of ash across her cheek she hadn't noticed. But she wore it like armor. Her boots thudded hard against the floorboards as she pushed through the door. Sheriff Walton looked up from his desk pipe in hand, squinting through the haze. "Miss Tanner, heard about the fire. Sorry for your loss." James followed her in, unfolding the charred paper scrap from his coat. "We found this in Harlan Deeks' shack near Cinder Hollow. You know the name Walton took." The scrap adjusted his glasses and frowned. "I know Harlan. Served some time a decade back for pulling a blade on a neighbor in a land dispute. Got out, kept to himself. Never figured him for arson, though." "Then you don't know men like Harlan," Lark said. "He came sniffing around my land more than once, acting like I was just passing through. Like the place wasn't mine." Walton grunted. "Lot of fellas in this valley think if there ain't a man on a deed, it's up for grabs." Lark crossed her arms. "Then maybe it's time someone reminded them the law don't care who signs the papers." The sheriff looked at her a long moment. "You saying you want to press charges?" James leaned forward. "We're saying this won't stop with Lark. One family's barn already burned. The firebug's getting bolder. You want to wait until someone's dead?" Walton blew out a slow breath and set the paper down. "All right. I'll send Deputy Krause out that way. Keep eyes on the trailheads. But if Deeks gets wind we're hunting him, he'll vanish like smoke. He already has," Lark said, voice cool. "We need to flush him out." Walton looked between the two of them. "You suggesting bait, I'm suggesting we make noise," she replied. "Let the valley know I'm not scared. If he wants to silence me, he'll have to try harder." James stared at her, and the corner of his mouth twitched. "You sure about this?" She met his gaze, steady as sunrise. "You don't scare a woman who's already walked through fire barefoot." That afternoon, Lark rode out with Nettie to the Peterson homestead, where the local women were organizing a barn raising for the family who'd lost everything. She didn't wait to be asked. She grabbed a hammer and started helping rebuild rafters. The wind carried word faster than wagons. By sundown, half the valley knew Lark Tanner had picked up her tools again, not to weep over what she lost, but to lift up someone else. They worked past dark lanterns glowing against raw timber, and when someone brought stew in dented tin pots, Lark sat on an overturned barrel and laughed for the first time in weeks. Nettie passed her a tin cup of cider. "Sure you're not pushing too hard?" she asked, watching Lark's hands tremble slightly as she drank. "I need to push," Lark said. "If I stop, I'll fall through the cracks like my mother did." Nettie studied her. "That ain't your destiny." "I know." Lark nodded, but it would have been if I'd stayed quiet. They rode back to town under stars. The moon hung low, nearly full, its light silvering the trail. They reached the boarding house to find James waiting on the porch, arms crossed, hat low. He didn't speak until they dismounted. "There's news," he said. Lark tensed. Deeks James shook his head. "Worse. There's a land transfer request filed down in Dry Creek. Someone trying to claim your acreage. The document says you abandoned it after the fire." "I never." Lark stopped herself, rage flooding her voice. "That's a lie. They're counting on fear," James said. "On women like you having no one to fight for them." "I'm not alone," Lark said. "Not anymore." He stepped closer, his tone quiet. "You're not." Inside, Nettie lit the stove while Lark sat at the table and laid out every paper she still had, her deed, old tax receipts, her late husband's will. Her fingers moved fast, methodical, as she built a wall of proof. James watched her with admiration edged in sorrow. "You shouldn't have to fight this hard, just to keep what's yours." "I'm not fighting just for me," she replied. I'm fighting so no one else thinks they can get away with it." A knock on the door jolted them all. James reached for the rifle by the wall. "It's after 10, Nettie whispered. Lark moved to the window and lifted the curtain just enough. A figure stood outside, hat in hand, Deputy Kraus. James opened the door. "Sorry to come by so late," Kraus said, breath misting in the night air. "We tracked fresh boot prints at Deke's shack this morning. Weren't there when you left. Looks like he doubled back." Lark's pulse spiked. Kraus went on. "We followed him west down through the wash. They vanished near the old McAllister silo. I think he's hiding out nearby." James nodded. "Then that's where we'll start in the morning." Kraus looked to Lark. "You sure you're up for more of this?" She met his gaze without blinking. "I've lost too much already. I'm not losing my name. Or my home." The deputy gave a quiet nod and tipped his hat. "Then we'll ride at first light." When the door shut behind him, silence filled the room like thunder waiting to break. James sat across from Lark. "He's desperate. That makes him dangerous." "So am I," Lark said. "But I'm not reckless. I'll keep my eyes open." James reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "You've got more than eyes, Lark. You've got people who believe in you." Her hand tightened in his. Outside, wind rattled the shutters and the fire popped low in the hearth. But inside, something steadier had taken root, a promise not just of survival, but of justice. Not just for herself, but for the land, the valley, and every woman who'd been told to be silent. Lark stood and walked to the window again, staring into the dark. She wasn't waiting for safety. She was ready to make it herself. He stood over the grave with his hand over his heart and whispered, "I won't let your story end with sorrow." The wind swept low across the plains, rustling through the tall grass, like a whisper of things left unsaid. Elijah stood at the fresh grave, his hat held over his heart, the brim pressed close to his chest. The carved wooden marker was simple, just her name and the dates, but it felt like a monument carved into his soul. Beside him, Ruth held little Nora, who clutched a red ribbon in her hand, the same one her mama used to tie back her hair. Her eyes were dry now, too much grief compressed into her tiny body to shed more. Ruth's other hand rested on Elijah's forearm, a steady, quiet presence that had held them all upright these last days. "I won't let your story end with sorrow," Elijah whispered. His voice was sandpaper and smoke raw from silence. He closed his eyes. "You gave your last breath trying to give that baby girl a life. That don't get buried. Not while I've got strength in my bones." He didn't move for a long while, even as the sun tilted westward and shadows stretched long across the dry field. The funeral had been quiet, with just a handful of folks from town who'd heard the tale, some too ashamed of what they didn't do, some too proud to admit they were moved. But a few had come, and a few mattered. Hank had stood silent as stone, his big arms crossed over his chest, like a barn door nailed shut, but his eyes had shined with something close to tears. Mabel had brought a basket of biscuits wrapped in cloth, placed it near the tree line without a word. And Samuel, the orphan boy Elijah had taken in months back, stood beside him through the whole service like he'd grown 10 years older overnight. After the last person drifted off, Elijah finally turned, hat still in hand, and walked back toward the house. Ruth followed, holding Nora close, her own face a fortress of quiet resolve. "She was younger than I remembered," Elijah murmured. "Too young to carry all that hurt. Too young to go." Ruth said nothing. The wind spoke for both of them. At the porch, Samuel sat whittling a stick with one of Elijah's old knives, his face set with focus. When he saw them coming, he stood, brushed the shavings off his knees. "Is she, you know?" Resting now, he asked, voice low. Elijah nodded. She is. The hard part's over for her. Samuel's mouth twisted. Don't feel like the hard part's over for us. No, Elijah admitted. It don't. They ate in silence that night, all except for the soft hum Nora made when Ruth rocked her to sleep. The fire in the hearth popped, casting flickers across the log walls. Elijah's food sat mostly untouched. He stared into the fire, thoughts drifting like smoke. Ruth leaned forward. We can't change what happened, but we can decide what happens next. Elijah looked at her. I don't want that little girl to carry the same kind of emptiness her mama did. I saw it in her eyes before she passed. She didn't want that cycle to go on. Ruth nodded. Then we break it. We raise her different. She don't need to know all the pain, just the love. It struck Elijah then like a nail driven clean through a board that this wasn't just a rescue anymore. It was a covenant. I'll raise her like my own, he said. She'll grow up with storybooks and shoes that fit, and someone who listens when she talks. And I'll make sure she knows a woman's worth ain't in what others see, Ruth added, but in how she stands and who she chooses to be. Elijah leaned back, arms folded, eyes still fixed on the flames. I never thought this ranch would see so many new beginnings. Ruth smiled faintly. It's where pain comes to find healing. The following days were heavy with the quiet rhythms of rebuilding. Elijah fixed the roof on the north barn, where the wind had peeled a few shingles. Ruth started planting in the early vegetable beds, guiding Samuel's hands as he learned how to till without tearing the soil. And little Nora, each day she held tighter to Ruth's skirt, followed her like a shadow, and slowly started smiling again. One morning, Elijah stood in the barn with Hank going over the spring cattle schedule. The big man scratched his chin. You think that girl'll remember her mama, Hank asked. Elijah glanced toward the house where the curtain fluttered as Ruth passed with Nora in her arms. Maybe, he said, but what matters more is how she remembers her childhood. You mean you, I mean all of us. The home we make. The choices we teach her to make. Hank looked thoughtful for a moment. You're building more than fences here, Elijah. Trying to. That evening, Samuel brought over something he'd carved from a piece of pine, crude but honest. A little horse, its legs thick and awkward, its eyes scratched on with a nail tip. It's for her, he said, cheeks coloring. Nora. I thought maybe she could have something that didn't come from hurt. Elijah took the carving and ran his thumb over the smooth back. She'll treasure it, Samuel. Thank you. They gave it to her after supper. She held it like it was porcelain, then pressed it to her chest with a grin that made Elijah feel something crack and settle inside him. Later that night, Ruth sat beside him on the porch. The sky was a wide, star-pocked stretch of velvet, and the wind had quieted to a hush. She's laughing now, Ruth said. Little bits here and there. Means her spirit's waking up, Elijah replied. Maybe ours too, Ruth added gently. Elijah took her hand. They didn't speak after that. The silence between them was sacred, filled with all the things words weren't big enough to hold. Just before going in, Elijah looked once more toward the grave beneath the tree. The grass there was already starting to grow again, like life was answering death in the only way it knew how. He whispered into the night more to himself than anyone else, I won't let your story end with sorrow, not while breath's in me. The wind stirred the leaves like a sigh, and inside Nora's quiet laughter drifted down the hallway, soft and true. The courtroom was quiet until Elijah rose and said, She may not have your blood, but she has our love, and that counts for more than you ever gave her. The courthouse smelled of old wood and dust. Its rafters creaked as a cold wind pushed through the narrow windows. Elijah sat straight-backed in the front row, his broad shoulders rigid, his jaw tense. Ruth sat beside him, fingers laced tight in her lap. Nora clung to her side, quiet, her wide eyes flitting between the strange men in suits and the heavy oak door that hadn't yet opened. Across the aisle, a woman in a pressed navy dress kept dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. Janine Carter, the sister of the girl now buried beneath a cottonwood tree on Elijah's land. The sister who hadn't appeared once while her kin lay starving. The woman had arrived in town 3 days ago, all perfume and accusations, asking how a stranger like Elijah had the right to keep her niece. Elijah didn't trust the tears. He'd seen real grief. It didn't come dressed in silk gloves and polished shoes. The judge entered a round man with tired eyes and a slow walk. He glanced at the docket, then up at the courtroom. In the matter of Nora Carter's custodial petition, "Is Ms. Janine Carter present? I am, Your Honor," the woman said, standing. Her voice was sugary and smooth, but her gaze never met Elijah's. "And Mr. Elijah Boone here," Elijah said, rising. The judge motioned for them to sit. "This hearing is to determine interim custody until a full guardianship petition can be reviewed. Ms. Carter, you filed for immediate removal of the child from Mr. Boone's home, citing familial rights and concerns for her well-being. Please explain." Janine stood again. "Your Honor, I only recently learned of my niece's existence. My sister and we had our differences, but I would never have abandoned her child had I known. It's clear to me she belongs with blood. And you intend to raise her yourself, of course." The judge scribbled something and turned to Elijah. Mr. Boone. Elijah stood. "She may not have my blood, but she has our love, and that counts for more than you ever gave her." A hush fell across the room. The judge looked up, surprised by the weight of Elijah's words. "She came to us broken," Elijah continued. "Starving, half frozen. Her mother died trying to save her. We didn't ask for her, but the Lord saw fit to place her in our care, and we haven't let her down. Ruth and I have raised her these past months. She laughs now, sleeps sound, knows what it means to be safe. Ain't that what matters most?" Janine shifted in her seat. Elijah looked directly at the judge. "Blood can disappoint you. Family's what you build." The judge leaned back, silent for a long moment. "Do you have any legal standing?" "No, sir. But I've got a barn full of folks who'll swear what we've done for her." Samuel stood at the back. "He saved her, gave her a life. And I'm not alone," Elijah added. "Ask the school teacher. Ask Doc Briggs. Ask the whole valley. They'll tell you what she was when she arrived, and what she is now." Janine's voice cracked. "But I'm her aunt." Elijah turned his eyes steel. "Where were you when her mama was dying?" The courtroom fell still. Even the judge didn't interrupt. "She wrote letters to you." "I found 'em, unopened," Elijah said. "She begged for help. You never answered, so forgive me if I don't believe you found your conscience overnight." Ruth stood then, slowly, Nora still clinging to her skirt. "We're not perfect. But we show up, every single day. That girl knows she's wanted, loved, seen." The judge leaned forward. "Ms. Carter, where do you reside?" "Chicago." "And your job?" "I manage a fashion boutique." "Are you prepared to relocate here?" Janine hesitated. "I know, I assumed I'd take Nora back with me. To a city she's never seen, away from everyone she knows. I'd give her a better life." Elijah stepped forward. "What kind of life forgets who she's become here?" The judge sighed, his pen tapping softly. "I can't make a permanent ruling today. But given what I've heard, I'm placing Nora under temporary guardianship with Mr. Boone and Mrs. Ruth Andrews until a full investigation is conducted." Janine's face pinched. "You can't be serious." "I am," the judge replied. This isn't about checking a box on bloodline. It's about a child's stability and well-being, and I believe she has that now. The gavel hit wood with a final thunk. Janine rose, flustered, and walked out without another word. The room slowly emptied, leaving Elijah, Ruth, and Nora sitting in stunned quiet. "She ain't done," Elijah muttered. "She'll come back." Ruth nodded. "Then we'll be ready." Later that evening, they sat around the kitchen table. Samuel passed around fresh cornbread. Nora climbed into Elijah's lap, her head resting against his chest. He held her gently, stroking her back. "Did I do okay in there?" he asked. "You did more than okay," Ruth said softly. "You said what mattered. I just spoke the truth. Sometimes that's the loudest thing you can do." Elijah looked down at Nora. "We're not out of the woods yet, but she's still here, and that counts for something." Outside, the wind picked up again, colder now, as if warning them, but inside the walls held warmth. The fire danced. The child breathed easy, and Ruth said quietly, "Then we keep holding on, no matter what storm's next." Elijah nodded. He felt the storm coming too, but this time they wouldn't face it alone. The educational lesson learned from this story is that love, commitment, and consistent care often carry more weight than blood ties alone. In life, we may not always get to choose the family we're born into, but we can choose to show up for those who need us, and sometimes that chosen family becomes the most enduring kind. The bonds we build through compassion and responsibility can outlast even the strongest storms. For older adults, this reminds us that legacy isn't just what we leave behind in name, but what we nurture in the hearts of those we care for.